Nuremberg trials play like a broken record. Soldiers were following orders. Doctors were following orders. It's time for us to have the talk. The old man's wife and son sit with me at the foot of his bed. He lies there, comatose. 94, advanced dementia, massive cerebral infarct today, an impending code tonight. Destruction if I fail, dignity if I succeed. I explain the situation, prognosis, code status. Let my son decide, she says. What your husband would have wanted, I specify. I'm not ready to let Pops go, the son responds. I recall a quote from elementary school, stand up for what's right, even if you're standing alone. Again, I explain, more simply, more emphasis on what Pops would have wanted. The son feels this stroke should not be fatal. That, he orders, is my job tonight. The code blue is called. Ribs give way, but his heart defies us. We tidy the room. Wife and son return. The order was full code, yet as I testify here, alone, my heart cries out.
I can't remember his name, or how old he was, nor what exactly was it that finally pushed him over the edge, into the realm of the non-living. My memory of him is vague, a few moments of lucidity shrouded by layers of a less than perfect recollection, compounded by the present passage of time. He was old, frail, emaciated, consumed to the point of wasting by some malignant disease. I remember his room number in the ICU. I remember the angles of his face, sharp, haggard, and painful. He was the first one who introduced my hands to the sensation of cracking ribs. He was the one whose vocal cords accepted my first endotracheal tube. His feeble circulation received the first vial of epinephrine dispensed at my command. And his soul was the first one I tried to jolt back into existence. After the dust settled and my own breaths became regular, I remember my last moment with him. Not knowing why, I made it a point to look into his eyes. Distant, lifeless, blank eyes with corneas reflecting images of myself. I remember committing them to my memory the same way his retinas eternally committed my image. It was the end of one life and a baptism of fire by another. His death, his image living on through my existence and being revived more than a decade later, thousands of miles across the world in a gathering of complete strangers.
It took a while for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. As his shape became clear, again my mind misgave that I had seen him somewhere before. Or rather, I had not seen him, but some form of him. He lay with one arm stretched above his head, his elbow bent back so that his hand was twisted back near his face. His back was arched, jutting his ribs out from his body. His legs made jagged angles with the bed, while his other arm was frozen, reaching for something beyond his wall. "How are you feeling now?" I said. Without moving, or even so much as opening his eyes, he said the same. We had been through this routine a couple of times a day for the past week. I paused for a moment and looked at him. His body was riddled with cancer, and he ended up back in the hospital every time he had chemotherapy. I stood there for a moment. It wasn't his face that looked familiar. It was his body. I had the distinct feeling that I was missing something, that I was forgetting something. "Are the meds helping at all?" I said. Again, he answered me without moving. "No." As my eyes swept over his form again, that terrible attitude finally took shape for me. He was Prometheus. It was unmistakable now that I had seen a painting of Prometheus in this exact same pose. In the portrait, he is chained to a boulder, and the eagle of Zeus is tearing out his liver. Even without the awful bird and the metal bondage, the likeness was unmistakable. But why should I think of Prometheus now? Something dwelling in the collective unconscious directed my attention to this posture, because it wasn't one to be forgotten. This was the archetype of suffering, and suffering itself deserved remembrance. It deserved deference. And if all shapes and forms return like waves lapping on a beach, then what part do I play in this man's story? Am I the eagle ripping at his liver? No. Certainly his cancer would be cast as the eagle. Like the eagle, it ravages him, and then seems to remit, only to return with more ferocity to continue his dismantling. Would I be his chains? No. His family, that kept him tethered to this great rock, would be his chains. Would I be Zeus, who condemned him to this fate? No. Zeus would play himself, or be interchanged with some other deity or energy, or randomness for that matter, without any real consequence. So where do I fit in this story? Perhaps, through the ages, a character was forgotten in the retelling. Some god of the underworld who offers him a sadistic bargain would be my character. For who else would offer someone time in exchange for pain? What merciful divinity would offer agony to delay his mother's grief? Who could see this suffering and think that it was treatment? Or maybe my character was never supposed to be in this story at all. I suddenly realized that I had been standing there in the dark, looking at him for far too long. Please let me know if there is anything I can do. He didn't move.
Night Float was already unpredictable, but ICU nights were even more unpredictable. The 30 patients in the unit were all of ours, even and especially the ones I did not know. This frail, elderly woman had been there for about a week. All I heard during rounds was that she wasn't improving, and I didn't know why. If she could just hold on till morning, Lara would be back in and put the whole picture together. My senior sensed that there was something wrong with her even before I did. I needed trends I did not know. Maybe she's at baseline. She looked okay from where I was looking at her. My senior and I went for lunch before the cafeteria closed, all the while telling me he needed to come back and check on that lady because she was not doing well. We got something, returned, and sure enough, there was more than one nurse in the room. Oh no, I thought, here it goes. I hope we fix her. She was fine a week ago. She was on a venti mask at this point, and still saturation was in the 80s. We need an ABG. Her pulses were barely palpable. The Doppler couldn't pick them up. Her saturation continued to drop. Blindly, my senior attempted. I held her other hand, told her to hold on, and that it would just be a pinch. I told her to just keep breathing, that it was all she had to do. At some point, she looked right at me and said, I just can't anymore. Her DNR read intubate but no CPR. Respiratory intubated her as her sats dropped, and they delivered rescue breaths. We impatiently watched as her heart rate dropped into the 30s. Her rhythm was all over. At some point, my senior broke the silence and said, look, she's in shockable rhythm. We could have shocked her. I think it was the fact that it was unexpected, and I hadn't quite prepared for the passing of this patient. I guess I have a way of suppressing emotion for the sake of appropriateness. My behind-the-scenes breakdown was after I called the family, informed them that the patient had died, after the EDRS form was filled, and after the primary doctor was called. And it was before morning rounds, before any other interns got there, and before the sun came up. Maybe I shouldn't have unrealistically expected that my kind-hearted hand-holding and encouragement would pull her through. She was right. She just couldn't. She was sicker than that.
I have never been so anxious about a patient appointment. It was a sweet lady from Colombia in her 60s, always accompanied by her sister or daughter to help with her English. Though she was fairly healthy for most of her life, she was starting to look unusually frail. She had also lost a large amount of weight. Something appeared to be very wrong. I had always hoped that my patients would remember me and what I tell them. After this day, however, I had not a doubt this would be the case. The news that I had was not only life-changing, but likely fatal. A mass was found at the head of the pancreas. It had already encased the surrounding blood vessels, unresectable as the radiologist's report had read. Rarely is a single piece of medical news so drastic and the implications of it so profound. The terrible prognosis associated with pancreatic cancer is very clear, but this event hit especially close to home for me, as I had lost a family member to this disease just a few years back. Prior to medical school, it was my only personal experience with terminal illness. The worst news that I had ever delivered as a physician was ironically about the same illness as what had affected me so greatly on a personal level. But it was apparent to me that this patient did not need me to assume the role of a concerned family member. She needed a physician who would not only show compassion, but advocate and coordinate her care, as well as be honest about expectations and prognosis. After undergoing a short but ultimately unsuccessful course of chemotherapy, I encouraged her to pursue palliative care. I kept in close touch with her until the patient decided to return to her native Colombia to be closer to her extended family. Despite the poor outcome, this experience helped me to form the kind of doctor-patient connection that I will remember for the rest of my life.
The doctors pounded on his chest. "Next round of epi," the attending commanded. The patient's fingers and face began turning blue. I knew he wasn't going to make it. Just 57 years old. Why so young? His wife stood in the corner. I could tell her heart was broken. She knew these were his final moments. 30 minutes had gone by, and our attempts at resuscitation were futile. "Time of death, 11:30 p.m., said the attending. His lifeless body lay there, and his mourning wife at the bedside. My heart sank, and I was suddenly overwhelmed with sadness. My senior resident gave me a pat on the back and said, "Don't worry, you'll eventually get accustomed to this." But will I? Amanda Scott.
Spaniard. Caminante son tus huellas, el camino y nada más. Caminante no hay camino, se hace el camino al andar. Al andar se hace el camino y al volver la vista atrás, se ve la senda que nunca se ha de volver a pisar. Caminante no hay camino, sino estelas en el mar. Antonio Machado. And with these words I relate to you. For 3 weeks I took care of your earthly shell, and the first day I laid eyes upon you, seared a lasting memory. There you were, propped like a puppet in an ICU bed, seated, intubated, a sight of sadness, hopelessness, large abdomen, in your 50s but old for your age. White hair, white beard, alone, ill. Day after day the same. Then one day, as I enter your dark dungeon, I saw a picture on the wall of you, thin, happy, in love with the woman next to you. I never saw her here, never had a chance to ask you about her. Every morning I would stare at the picture and then look at you and wonder what changed. You, her, fate? For a few days you got better, and the machine keeping you alive was no longer needed. I heard your voice for the first time, saw your beautiful eyes. You were pleasant, always wanting human company, always wanting to eat. I was afraid to ask about the picture, did not know what memories this could bring to you. Hope came to an abrupt end when your heart stopped beating and a machine resumed control of your breaths, and I took over your heart by compressing your chest, and with every press felt rib after rib crack, crack, crack. Once your heart began to beat on its own, the answer I was seeking came in the form of a person that knew your story. Poor man, she said, when referring to you. His wife died 12 years ago, and he never moved on. His friends always asked him to join their parties, but he refused because this would remind him that she was gone. My eyes opened in disbelief, and my heart sank in sadness. He stayed at home, keeping her memory alive. I then understood why you let life pass you by due to such loss. You became a small leaf caught in a puddle of an ever-flowing river. Translation to the prior poem. Traveler, it is your footsteps, the path and nothing else. Traveler, there is no path. The path is made as you walk. As you walk, you make your path, and when you turn to look back, you will see the path that you can never step upon. Traveler, there is no path, just wakes over the sea. And here you were stranded, in the path looking back, living with a ghost. As the days progressed, the candle of your life was losing its light, no matter how much we kept the wind from blowing it away. I think she was calling loudly for you, and you were glad to listen. Again, your heart stopped, but we kept you from crossing over, crushing your ribs, breathing for you, silently praying for no return. Once again you came back, but like a candle inside an upside down glass jar, the light dimmed as the oxygen was consumed. The end finally came, your last breath, your last sign of life vanished.